1541, Philip Melanchthon wrote a statement condemning the theory of Copernicus, calling for it to be repressed by governmental force. This is what he wrote. Certain people believe it is a marvelous achievement to extol so crazy a thing like that Polish astronomer who makes the earth move and the sun stand still. Really, wise governments ought to repress impudence of mind. Certainly, we've come quite a ways in understanding of the solar system and of this universe of which we are such a small part in many years. And yet, unfortunately, as creationists, we find ourselves very much in the same boat with Copernicus, with the powers that be suppressing our ideas. I don't believe, I'm sure most of you would agree tonight, it is never healthy to repress open-mindedness and investigation into the facts. We live in undoubtedly the freest nation ever in the history of the world. We have been known as a people who are able to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. And the question that our fellow Americans need to be asking themselves today, where did the founders get such wonderful ideas and instill them in the very fabric of our republic? Did they view themselves as the products of Darwinian evolution, or did they see themselves as having been specially designed and created? We know the founding documents of our nation speak for themselves. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I submit to you again tonight that one of the bitter fruits of atheism will necessarily be the dismantling of the foundational roots of this great republic. Once again, I'd like to welcome all of you, especially those of you that are visiting with us. And on behalf of the churches of Christ throughout West Georgia, we want to say thank you for your participation and your interest in this timely subject. Our featured speaker for the weekend is Dr. Brad Harrub. And for those of you that were here last night, you know he is eminently qualified and is well prepared to make the case that we know so desperately needs to be made. I'll quickly rattle off some of the quality we mentioned last night and accomplishments of Dr. Harrub. He earned his degree first from Kentucky Wesleyan College, a degree in biology. He went on to get his doctorate in anatomy and neurobiology from the College of Medicine at the University of Tennessee. He was listed in Who's Who among scientists and researchers. He's authored a number of books and co-authored others, has written many tracts and journal articles, has presented this type of lectureship in over 47 states and 5 different continents. He was an invited speaker to the International Conference on Creationism, and he has appeared on the television show Origins. He currently serves as the executive director and co-founder of Focus Press and is co-editor of Think Magazine, a monthly magazine on Christian evidences. He is also the co-host for the television show Think About It. Again, before we present our speaker to you tonight, a couple of things we need to cover. First of all, I'd like to make a correction from last night. I did ask the question and I did receive clarification, and it didn't come out when I spoke, but for those of you that are interested, Dr. Harrub will be at the Bremen Church of Christ in the morning at 9 o'clock for the Bible study hour, not 9:30 but 9, and then 10 o'clock for the worship hour, and then tomorrow evening at 7:30, and then we'll conclude 7 o'clock on Monday evening. And I apologize for that misinformation. We had a good discussion, I thought, last night after the presentation and our question and answer session, and there will be another Q&A tonight, so I want to make you aware of that. We had a good suggestion, I believe, from the floor last night, that one of the things we need to do more than perhaps anything else, if we're going to stem the tide and turn the tables, and that is we need to ask God's blessing. With that in mind, we're going to ask James Bradshaw, who preaches for the Tallapoosa Church of Christ, to come forward and begin tonight with a word of prayer.
Would you bow with me? Our Heavenly Father, we come to you tonight thanking you so much for all that you've blessed us with. We thank you so much that you spoke into existence all that we see and all that we know. We're so thankful that we have the opportunity to gather together freely in this great country in which we live. We're so thankful that free men had such wonderful thoughts and turn to you for some of their guidance. We pray that as we meet tonight that you'll be with Dr. Harrub as he brings to us some words that will cause us to reflect, to think. We pray that people may have open minds and freely examine science as we know it and compare it to all the facts. I think it is evidently clear that it is true that you are our Creator, that your words are true. I pray that our country may return to the fundamental morality that we once stood for that comes from your great word, the book, the Bible. I pray that more people may learn about Jesus Christ. I pray that more people may truly see that there is nothing to fear from the Bible and science, that they indeed are compatible. I pray that you'll be with us as in our endeavors. The churches that have put this program together, may they prosper. May they continue to be a people of your word. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Intellectual intimidation is probably one of the biggest tools that college professors will use in order to try to support the evolution theory. Basically, it goes like this. All intelligent people believe evolution. Richard Dawkins, he said it's absolutely safe to say that if you meet somebody who claims not to believe in evolution, that person is ignorant, stupid, or insane, or wicked. But I'd rather not consider that. And so, off to school they go. They open up textbooks and they read that evolution is a fact, not a theory, that birds arose from non-birds, humans from non-humans. And there's our child. And they began to digest all of this evolutionary spin about, for instance, the Big Bang. The idea that a long, long time ago, in fact, I very jokingly say, a long time ago in a land far, far away. That's kind of how the evolutionary theory starts. It's a myth. Long, long time ago, they're going to say that we exploded. And in fact, they go on to say a closed universe, a Big Bang may occur once every 80 to 100 billion years. Now, as you look at that, and we're presenting it as fact, think about this. 3 fundamental pillars that evolution cannot explain. Number 1, how do we get life from non-life? Number 2, where did the stuff for the universe really come from? What is the origin of the universe? Number 3, how do we explain design in nature? Because if you've got design, again, you've got to have a designer. Evolution can't explain those, but there is a model that can, and that is called the creation model. Tonight, what I want us to do is I want us to look at some of the evidence for both sides. I know that most of you have been exposed to the evolution side. In fact, if we were to open up a textbook, any textbook, biology, more than likely you're going to see this example. This is a staple for the evolutionary theory. It's what I call an evolutionary icon. Peppered moths. If you look on the screen, you'll notice there are 2 moths. One of them is kind of hidden. The story that our 2 children are told is this. A long time ago, there used to be 95% of the light-colored moths, 5% of the dark. The light-colored moths had the advantage that the birds couldn't see them. The dark-colored moths, they were easily picked off the trees by the birds. And then the industrial age happened. Soot and ash from the factories began to get on the trees turned darker, and all of a sudden the population shifted. To where now you've got 95% dark, 5% light. They call this evolution in action. And like I say, it's in almost every single biology textbook, trying to support the idea that evolution is true. In fact, you can even go to museums today and you can see examples of it. And yet, here's part of the problem with it, folks. Those moths do not rest on tree trunks. You say, well, hold on, time out, Brad, you just showed us pictures. Right here, they're on tree trunks. Yeah, those are dead. They've either been pinned or they're glued there. In fact, in over 40 years of research, they've only found just a couple of moths actually resting on tree trunks. Number two, they don't have a tendency to choose matching backgrounds. They don't look at a tree and go, hey, that's a dark tree, I'm a dark moth, I need to be there. Number three, most importantly, the guy who did this original research, his name was Kettlewell. Nobody has been able to replicate his findings. And you know what we call that in science? Garbage. And yet, here's what I want you to think about. We asked a Canadian textbook writer, why are we putting these fake pictures in the textbooks? We know this is a lie. Why do we keep doing it? Here's his answer. Bob Ritter said, you have to look at the audience. How convoluted do you want to make it for a first-time learner? The advantage of this example of natural selection is that it's extremely visual. We want to get across the idea of selective adaptation. Later on, they, talking about high school students, can look at the work critically. In other words, later on you can discern if it's true or not, but it sells the picture we want to sell. Now, if this were the only case of a little bit of a forgery, fakery, lying in the textbooks, I probably wouldn't get too upset. But the reality is, it's page after page after page. Let me show you another very common evolutionary icon. A guy by the name of Ernst Haeckel drew the pictures that you see on the screen. Now, in order to kind of make it make sense, I'm going to start in the lower left-hand corner, your lower left, where we've got a fish, a salamander, a turtle, a chicken, a pig, a couple of mammals, and then finally a human. At three different stages of growth, embryological growth. So very early on, a few weeks later, and a few weeks after that. Now, if you look across that top row, they pretty much all look the same, don't they? And they were drawn that way on purpose. Because this is a guy who believed very much in evolution. In fact, Ernst Haeckel said that his turning point in his thinking was when he read Charles Darwin's book, The Origin of Species. Those of you who really know your history, you know this is a guy who actually went to Charles Darwin's house there on the mount. They conversed together. He drew these pictures. Pictures that support the idea that really we all evolved from a common ancestor, therefore we all have this common appearance in the womb. The only problem is that he lied. He completely forged his pictures. He even got kicked out of the University of Jena for doing it. And yet, we're still using them today. Oh, we've colorized them. We made them prettier. But folks, listen to me. We've known now for over 150 years that these were forgeries. These were fakes. And in fact, these are Ernst Haeckel's pictures at the top. Here's the real McCoy at the bottom. And yet, what are we doing? We're filling our kids' ideas with this right here. Even though we know it's wrong. Why? Because it sells the picture they're wanting to sell. In fact, take a look. This is an article in Natural History magazine written by an evolutionist by the name of Stephen Jay Gould, who passed away several years ago. He wrote an article titled Atrocious, where he was addressing very specifically Haeckel's embryos. Look at what he said. We should therefore not be surprised that Haeckel's drawings entered the 19th century textbooks. But we do, I think, have the right to be both astonished and ashamed by the century of mindless recycling that has led to the persistence of these drawings in a large number, if not majority, of modern textbooks. A century of mindless recycling? Yep. For 100 years, folks, we're using evidence that is a lie. It is not really evidence. In fact, when you look at the truth, last night we touched on this just a little bit. They're wanting to say that evolution is a fact, and yet Can it explain why human beings laugh or cry? Or can it explain the origin of sex and gender? Or how about altruism, charity? What about the origin of language or the human consciousness? And all along the line, it's no, no, no. And yet, we still get this idea that we evolved up from some ape-like creature. Charles Darwin, in his second book, he said there is no fundamental difference between man and the higher mammals in their mental faculties. And so, here's what our kids get a steady dose of. About every, 6 to 9 months, the main or downstream media, depending on how you look at them, the mainstream media likes to put pictures like this out. And you can imagine how this influences young people. The one on the right is a creature that is right now kind of being elevated in science, Artie. Ardipithecus rhombus cadava. Under the bold heading of How Apes Became Human. In fact, take a look at the subtitle. What a new discovery tells scientists about how our oldest ancestors stood on 2 legs and made an evolutionary leap. Now, as you're looking at that, you just got to ask yourself, okay, where's their evidence? Where is the evidence that this is, quote, how apes became human? Well, let me show you. This right here is all they got. And I want you to look very carefully at that box, because within that box you're going to notice 5 separate independent little boxes, right? Each one of these little independent boxes, you know what those represent? Those are 5 different locations. They found the fossils in 5 different places. Now, let's look at exactly what they've got. We'll start up here. You've got some finger bones. You got a single toe bone. These are molars. This is the head of a femur. All of the stuff in the middle, every bit of that's teeth. You've got part of the mandible, some long bones of the arm. That's it. That's all they've got. And yet, they're going to tell us this is how apes became human. Take a look at an admission they made in this article. They said, Harrub Celeste and his colleagues haven't collected enough bones yet to reconstruct with great precision what the dog looked like. But they do know that it was about the size of a modern common chimpanzee, which when standing averaged about 4 feet tall. All right, so let me get this straight. We haven't collected enough bones yet to know what this guy looks like, and yet we're going to put his picture on the cover of Time, and in a 2-page spread of the magazine. But folks, here's the best part right here. In this article, they got a picture of that single toe bone, with a little caption underneath it that says, this toe bone proves the creature walked on 2 legs. Now, let me remind you, this is the only bone they got south of the femur. And yet, this toe bone, folks, the human foot's got 26 bones in it. They have 1. And yet, I want you to notice one other little admission they made about this toe bone. Talking about it, they said, not only is it separated in time by several 100,000 years, but it was also found some 10 miles away from the rest of those bones. Guess it just walked away? Can anybody in your right mind in this room imagine going out here, digging up some fossils, having a friend in Bremen call you and say, hey, I got a toe bone over here, I think it goes with your collection. And yet, that's what our kids are being sold. In fact, what I want to do for just a few moments of your time tonight, I want us to walk through what I call evolution's Hall of Shame. Because the reality is our kids are only getting one side. They're not being shown the truth. H.S. Lipton, commenting on it, he said, in fact, evolution has become a scientific religion. Almost all scientists have accepted it. Many are prepared to bend their observations to fit within it. Bend their observations. Take a look. This guy right here is my favorite. First candidate of our Hall of Shame is Nebraska Man. This is a guy who was actually used. Remember last night we talked a little bit about the Scopes monkey trial. This was actually used as evidence for evolution at that trial. In fact, 1922, the Illustrated London News, they put this picture of Nebraska Man in their paper. Now, folks, if we're putting pictures in the paper. And if we're using this as evidence in the Scopes trial, surely we do have evidence, right? Well, let me share with you. All of the evidence for this guy comes from a single tooth. It looks like 4 on the screen. That's actually the same tooth taken from 4 different vantage points. From this one tooth, we get this guy and his wife. Would you say there's a little bit of artistic license going on here? Folks, that's not scientific. There's more imagination right there than there is in Walt Disney World. And yet, here's the fun part. After we use it as evidence in Scopes trial, after we put it in the newspaper, and after we put it in the textbooks, we later discovered that tooth belonged to an extinct pig. That did make it into the newspaper. Or how about this guy, Piltdown Man, another one of my favorite candidates in the Hall of Shame. Here you see an artist's depiction of what he would look like. There's a sketch of him. Here you see the Piltdown skull. For this guy, what we've got to do in order to answer the question, where's the evidence? We've got to go to a gravel pit in Piltdown, England, 1912. 1912, they found pieces of a skull and this jawbone that you see over here to my right. Glued it together. They presented it to the world. And listen to me, for 40 years, folks, people bought the idea this was a missing link. 40 years! So, what did they actually do? They began to make replicas and sold them to museums all over the country. They put it in the textbooks. It took us 40 years to realize we'd really been lied to. Because what they actually did was they took a relatively recent modern skull, shattered it. They took the jawbone of an orangutan. They filed down the back teeth of that orangutan to make it look more human. They dipped the whole thing in acid to age it. They buried it themselves, only to later come back and discover it, glued it together, and presented it to the world and said, here's your missing ancestor. And for 40 years, people believed it. How about this guy, Orc Man, found in Spain? Again, we ask the question, where's the evidence? Because if you're going to brainwash my child, I want to know what evidence we're using. This time, a single piece of bone. Right back here, around the parietal occipital region of the skull. You can see it outlined on the back of the skull here. This is actually a cast that they made. If you look very carefully at this cast, you'll notice one thing importantly. If you notice the hand underneath, the size of this thing was very small. They couldn't figure out the curvature on this piece of bone did not fit a normal human skull. How do we get a big brain in there? Well, in 1982, they came up with a solution. They decided maybe that this is the fossil of a child. So 1982, they march out the banners, they rewrite the textbooks, they alert the media, we've got the oldest human fossil ever discovered in Europe. And again, the evolutionists just absolutely assure us that they've got the answer. The only problem with that is they found out later that one piece of bone belonged to a 6-month-old donkey. Folks, listen to me. That's not science. That's Hollywood. That is forcing something, bending something to fit a theory that you've already come up with. How are they doing it? Let me share with you. On the screen behind me, you see a skull that they have deemed as Homo erectus, upright walking man. Now, you might think that that's what they actually found. No, that's actually about 80 bone fragments collected from more than 5 different locations. I tell people with all seriousness, there's more Elmer's glue in that right there than there is a kindergarten class, okay? They glue all these little bone fragments together, but that right there is not really good enough to convince your child. So what do? They invite a scientific illustrator in. They say, hey, make us a cast of that. He does. And that's what we sell to museums. And that's what's got the pretty little placards in front of it that date this guy as being millions of years old. And then they invite him back and they say, hey, flesh this guy out a little bit. So he comes back and he puts a lower jaw on it, adds some muscles, begins to add the contours of the head. Lo and behold, They slapped some skin on it, and it looks like you went out back and took this picture. Now let me remind you folks, what you're looking at right here, that was 80 bone fragments taken in 5 different locations. We don't have a clue what this thing really did, what he looked like, whether or not, I mean, realistically, you look at that right there, those of you who watch football, looks like an NFL linebacker to me. And yet, because he's got a scientific name, and because that looks real, our kids are drinking the Kool-Aid. How about this one? Anybody in this room ever heard of Lucy? Oh yes. Australopithecus afarensis, her scientific name. For those of you who are not aware of how she got her nickname, the night that Donald J. Hansen made that discovery, they're out in the far region of Africa. They're celebrating. This is one of the biggest discoveries of all. And they only had one record. Now, for young people in the room, ask your mom and dad later what a vinyl is. They only had one vinyl record playing over and over and over, and it happened to be Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. The name stuck. Donald J. Hansen got very, very famous, very popular, very wealthy from this discovery. Well, let me point out something to you. This happened over 25 years ago. We've now, since then, had time to actually look at what he found. To actually do the measurements. You know, it's one thing when you find something and you say, hey, look what I found, and you report it, and lo and behold, the media gets a hold of it and they make a big deal about it. It's something totally different for the scientific community to have access to it, look at it, and question it and say, wait a second. About 5 years ago, we wrote a book called The Truth About Human Origins. It's a hardback book, about 500 pages. If you ever have trouble sleeping, it is a great book. In that book, we took every single one of these alleged missing links. And we didn't do what most people do, and that is go by the scientific drawings. We wanted to know what they'd actually found. What were the pieces of bone? How many different locations? I spent 3 or 4 months of my life doing nothing but measuring and looking at Lucy. And I'm going to share just a couple of things with you. I won't go through the whole list. But number one, up here, if you look, you'll notice on the second point, it talks about her having locking wrist. Why is that a big deal? Apes are quadrupeds. They walk on all fours. They have the ability to lock their wrist. When Lucy was first presented on the scene, they said, hey, she is upright. She's walking on 2 legs. She's on her way to becoming a human. And then we realized, oops, she's got locking wrist. In fact, Maggie Fox, she said, chance discovery made by looking at the cast of the bones of Lucy. The most famous fossil of Australopithecus afarensis shows that her wrist is stiff like a chimpanzee's. This suggests that her ancestors walked on their knuckles. The fourth point on the screen talks about a rib cage. Now, anatomically speaking, everybody in this room, all humans, you have a barrel-shaped rib cage. Okay, some of us got bigger barrels than others. But everybody in this room has got a barrel-shaped rib cage. Chimps, apes have got a conical shaped rib cage. Looks kind of like an ice cream cone. Comes down to a point. When Lucy was first presented on the scene, they said, hey, she's got a barrel-shaped rib cage. She's a transition on her way to becoming a human. And then they started sending replicas to museums all over the globe. And I want you to read for yourself what one of the curators said when they received their Lucy replica. Peter Smith said, when I started to put the skeleton together, I expected it to look human. Everyone had talked about Lucy being very modern, very human. So I was surprised by what I saw. I noticed that the ribs were more rounded in cross-section, more like what you see in apes. Human ribs were flatter in cross-section. But the shape of the rib cage itself was the biggest surprise of all. The human rib cage is barrel-shaped, and I just couldn't get Lucy's ribs to fit this kind of shape. But I could get them to make a conical-shaped rib cage, like what you see in apes. You see, folks, as you look through there, you realize this is nothing more than an adult male pygmy chimp. And you say, well, time out, male? Yeah, the 6th point on the screen, They have tried every form of computer-aided drafting, every measurement, trying to figure out how do you squeeze an infant through Lucy's pelvis. And folks, it ain't happening. Which means either Lucy was the last of her species and they all died out because she couldn't give birth, or really we should be calling Lucy Lucifer, meaning she's a he. And yet, here's something interesting. In this whole quest to see evidence, if I were to ask you, is this what Lucy looks like? Most of the students in this room. In fact, let me just show of hands, how many people have seen a picture like this in textbooks or magazines? Real high. Most of the students have. Okay, so we got to ask the question then, what does she really look like? Because all 8 of these images on the screen have been published as being Lucy. They've been published in magazines, encyclopedias, textbooks, National Geographic. But take a closer look. What about her jaw? Now, bear in mind, each one of these is allegedly Lucy. How about her ribs? How many ribs did Lucy actually have? Because some of these we got 5, some of them we got 7. Kind of makes me want to say, like the old game show with the real Lucy, please stand up. You see, folks, they can't even get their own fossils right. How are we to trust them about their interpretation if we got this right here going on? What about Neanderthal man? Most probably everybody in this room has heard of him. Ladies, let me just point out, just because your husband acts like a Neanderthal does not mean evolution is true, okay? Here you see an image of allegedly what he looks like. Here's some images drawn to try to give us this idea that he had this prominent brow you'll see right up here. One of National Geographic's favorites, over and over and over. So on the screen behind me, what you see in the background is a modern human skull. And then close up, you see what they're calling a Neanderthal skull. And again, you'll notice this prominent brow ridge right across the occipital crest, right across the eyes. They would say that this was our distant cousin, that basically this was the one that's close to human beings. Unlike Lucy or some of these others, this was really close to being a human. So when you look in textbooks, they'll show apes, they'll show humans upright, and they would say, this guy was really close to us. The only problem with that, 1958, a gentleman by the name of Dr. A.J. Cave, he examined these fossils. These are original Neander Valley fossils. And he proved that it was nothing more than a man who had suffered from advanced stages of arthritis. Question. Does arthritis change bone structure? Absolutely it does. In fact, in this room tonight, do we have individuals suffering from things like arthritis or osteoporosis or other bone-changing diseases, ailments? Okay, think about that for just a moment, and then ask yourself this little question. Is there variation in the room tonight? Like, as I'm looking out at you, I'm seeing, normal heads and skinny heads and fat heads. Okay, do you realize if we got fossilized right now, if everything closed in on us, there are some of you in this room who would probably well qualify as a Neanderthal. I'll point you out later, okay? A friend of mine, a fellow by the name of Jack Cuso, actually spent more time, he spent a lot more time studying the Neanderthal fossils than I did. He wrote a book called Buried Alive, in which he said, you must understand the skull really cries out disease. The teeth are badly decayed, the bones at the vault of the skull are extremely thick. There are many features that testify of acromegaly or the excessive secretion of growth hormone in adulthood. What are you saying, Jack? Are you saying this is a missing link? No, I'm saying it is a diseased human being. Isn't it kind of interesting that the missing link, realistically, is still missing? So what is it that our kids are not getting in the textbooks? What does the fossil record really show? I'm going to let a guy by the name of Jeremy Rifkin tell you, because I think he summed it up beautifully. He said, what the record shows is nearly a century of fudging and finagling by scientists, attempting to force various fossil morsels and fragments to conform with Darwin's notions, all to no avail. Today, the millions of fossils stand as very visible, ever-present reminders of the paltriness of the arguments and the overall shabbiness of the theory that marches under the banner of evolution. Think with me for just a moment. There are a lot of people out there who believe that we can squeeze evolution and the Bible together. And maybe throw the Big Bang and long time periods. Folks, think with me for just a moment. Genesis chapter 1. God starts out with water. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void. Darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. According to the Bible, this was a water-covered heavenly body. Remember, land doesn't come until later, right? So, creation says water first, then land. Evolution says land first, then water. There's one difference. Creation says birds and fish first, then land dwellers. Evolution says no. Fish, then land, then air. Creation says man was created with intelligence. Evolution says we eventually evolve our intelligence. Folks, those two aren't alike at all. And anybody in this room that thinks you can harmonize the two, that you can squeeze them together, let me ask you, how do we harmonize what Jesus Christ said? We read it last night. But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. Jesus indicating that there were people here at the beginning of creation. That's not what this teaches. This teaches that there was an earth, and after millions of years of evolving from an amoeba up to a man, finally we get this Homo sapien. It's not what Jesus told us. Folks, if you're trying to merge the two, please understand what you're doing is you're taking away the creation from the Creator. And you're putting it into the hands of some kind of a cosmological accident. A couple of years ago in St. Louis, we held the American Association for the Advancement of Science meeting. And I'll never forget, it was the year 2006. The reason I won't forget it is because it was that year that they were calling out to religious people to denounce intelligent design. They wanted preachers, priests, anybody to stand up against intelligent design. And they got a few. In fact, a Catholic priest by the name of George Cohn, he came and he went on record as saying the intelligent design movement belittles God. It makes God a designer, an engineer. The God of religious faith is a God of love. He did not design me. Now, if I asked you tonight, do we see design in the human body? I mean, for instance, if we were to go by an evolutionary perspective, which one came first? Nerves or organs? Which one did you evolve first? Now, most of you in this room are looking at that going, well, obviously you've got to have organs. Okay, folks, right now, you are digesting food without any input from you because of involuntary nerves. You don't have those nerves, you don't digest food. Your heart doesn't beat. Your lungs don't respire. You look at me and say, okay, well, then you got to have the nerves first. Okay, what good are nerves just hanging around dangling, waiting on you to evolve an organ? Furthermore, think about this. If you don't have a brain and a spinal cord, let's say that you did get a nerve. You got one nerve cell that just popped into existence. It's impossible, but we'll say miracles were the rule back then. Let's say that you got a nerve cell. Folks, if you don't have a brain and a spinal cord, that'd be like having a mouse for your computer without your computer. It doesn't do you any good. Add to that, we know that it takes a cell to make a cell. Where'd the first one come from? In other words, how do you get memories? How do you get the ability to think and communicate? How do you get all of that from some Big Bang explosion? You can't. And yet, sadly, by the age of, say, 3, 4, 5, our kids are already being indoctrinated into this theory. Now, as you're looking at this and thinking about this, let me throw out a really strong argument against evolution that some of you have never thought about, and it has to do with people. What about population statistics? What does that teach us? You know, we've been taking the population long enough with the census to know our population is doubling every 35 years. Now, as I show you this, let's look at this little line right here. Numbers don't lie, do they? They're incapable of lying. So follow me for just a moment. Every 35 years, population doubles. That includes wars, famines, diseases. So let's say that we start out with 2 people just 1 million years ago. Now, bear in mind, evolutionists would say humans started out 3 to 5 million, but we're gonna go just back 1 million years. We'll say the average generation is every 42 years. Every family averaged 2.4 children. That's on the low side, but I'm going to go conservative for their sake, right? Notice this. The entire population should be 10 to the 5,000 power. 10 to the 5,000. How big is that number? Take a look. The entire universe could only hold 10 to the 100 people. That's the entire universe, folks. I just showed you, this is 10 to the 5,000. You know what that means? That means for every area of a quarter, if evolution were true, we should have 500 people sharing that quarter. And yet, let's do this. What if we had 2 people, say, about 6,000 years ago? We should be at a population of about 8.34 billion. And you say, wait a second, Brad, we're not that big. We're somewhere between 6 and 7, so I just think we've just crossed the 7 billion point. Okay, yeah, but what happened about 4,000 years ago that knocked us back to 8? About the flood. Folks, listen to me, numbers don't lie. Last night I gave you a verse, some of you may have picked up on it, Genesis 3:20. Adam called his wife's name Eve because she was the mother of all living. And I pointed out during the talk, I said, the implication is all the lineage of humanity is coming through who? Eve. Now, if that is the case, how do we then explain all the different colors of people? I mean, if we really did just come from Adam and Eve, if creation and the Bible are correct, we ought to be able to explain all the different colors around us. And we can. Before I do that, though, I want to make sure, last night we touched on a point, and I want to touch on it again. I'm going to be using society's definition of race tonight, and that is skin color. But again, the Bible is very crystal clear. There's only one race, and that is the human race. But take a look. Your skin is colored by a biological pigment known as melanin. Everybody in this room has got melanocyte cells. Inside each one of those cells is a chemical, melanin, that determines how dark your skin is. The amount of melanin you've got is a direct product of your mom and your dad. Now, geneticists have come along and they said, hey, we're going to use letters to designate how much melanin somebody's got in their system. It's a dominant gene, so we use capital letters for somebody who's really, really dark skinned. We use lowercase letters, little a, little b, for somebody who's very, very fair skinned. So let's see if we can take 2 people. We're going to call them Adam and Eve. See if we can explain all the different skin colors around us. Like, for instance, what if Adam and Eve were both big A, big A, big B, big B, very, very, very dark skin? What would all their kids be? Big A, big A, big B, big B, right? They'd all be very, very dark skin. Is that what we see around us today? Nope. So I can look at you and tell you without any hesitation, folks, Adam and Eve were really, really dark skinned people. And you look at me and say, whoa, time out, Brad, you can't say that today. We're living in a politically correct environment. This is 2012. You might offend somebody. Well, that's okay. I'm going to offend all of you, so just wait your turn. How about this one? Little A, little A, little B, little B. Were Adam and Eve very, very fair skinned? No, because what would all their kids be? Very, very fair skinned. So I hate to tell you, every single summer when you get that Vacation Bible School package that's got a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Eve, that's not reality, folks. In fact, we see in the population today, 55% Caucasian, 37% Mongoloid, 8% Negroid, and these numbers are shifting as we begin to vary between cultures and, all right? What if God had used one dark skin and one light skin? On the screen behind me, you see what geneticists call a Punnett square. It's what we use to predict offspring. So here's what we're going to say. Across the top, we'll say this is Adam, and he was dark skinned and he's got the capital letters. Down the left-hand side is Eve. She was fair skinned, so we give her the lowercase letters. Inside each one of these 16 boxes is the potential of their offspring, and in this case, all 16 are right down the middle table. Is that what we see around us today? Nope. Somebody says, you're running out of options there, buddy. And you're right. But I still got one left. What if God started with a mixture? In science, we call this heterozygous. Basically, if he had started with that right there, the person would have that pretty mocha color. Now, stop right there. Where is the fertile crescent that we think all of the mankind started from? Garden of Eden, all of that kind of stuff. It's in the Middle East. What color are people over there? They're kind of mocha colored. What is the possibility if God has started with this right here? Folks, you can go all the way from one fair skin, 4 light tan, 6 tan, 4 darker brown, 1 very, very dark skin, for a total of 16, and 1 very tired mother. Now, I can get you that with 2 people. How many walked off the boat? 8. You give me 8 people, and you mix in the fact that today we're getting cars, planes, and trains, and within just a little bit of time you can marry between cultures, and you begin to see how we can have a rainbow of colors. And somebody says, I'm not buying it. I don't believe you, Brad. I don't think that can happen. Again, you guys hopefully by now are learning I'm an evidence guy. So don't take my word for it. How about this? Young lady, she's asking the question, can you guess my secret? Her secret is she's got a twin sister who's black. Over and over again we see it really is possible to get different colors from one set of parents. You say, well, Brad, that doesn't explain how we got a predominance of dark-skinned people down around the equator and light-skinned people around Europe. Isn't that evolution? Okay, let's see if we can figure out a biblical and a scientific reason of why that would happen. If I asked you tonight, why were people, or when were people dispersed? What event in history? Somebody said it, Tower of Babel. Okay, about 500 years after the flood, remember they were building up this tower. Now, were they dispersed by skin color or by language? Language. Tower of Babel. God confused their languages. So here's what I want you to imagine. We got 1,000 people, all different colors. They all end up speaking Swahili. They find each other because they can understand each other. They decide to migrate down towards the equator. Who's going to fare better in that environment closer to the sun? Dark skin or light skin? Dark skin, and here's why. The melanin that makes their skin dark also protects them from the sun's harmful UV rays. The more melanin they got, the more protection they got. So after a few short years, does it make sense after 2, 3, 4 generations, it's going to be the fair-skinned people that are going to die off from skin cancers and such? Yeah. All right, let's flip it. Let's say we got 1,000 people, and they all different colors. They all speak Swedish. They all migrate up towards Northern Europe. Can you think of a reason why, after a few short generations, there would be a predominance of fair-skinned people there? Yeah. That's a region of the world that doesn't get a whole lot of sunlight. We actually need sunlight. We use it to make vitamin D. fact, those of you who were outside a little bit today, you got some vitamin D. What's vitamin D used for? Without it, folks, you don't absorb house seal. Why is that a big deal? Because without it, you got some serious skeletal problems. You got bone deformation. You're going to have rickets and such. You've got to have vitamin D in order to have healthy bones and a skeletal structure. So, follow me for just a minute. Northern Europe doesn't get a whole lot of sunlight. Anybody that's got a lot of melanin, that's dark skin, is going to be unable to absorb what little sunlight is available. They're going to be the ones that die off from bone disorders and such. So in that environment, it is a plus to be fair-skinned. Now let me throw a boomerang and see if anybody here gets this one. Neanderthal man was found in Neander Valley, Germany. Right up here. Place that doesn't get a whole lot of sunlight. Would we expect there to be some bone deformations up in that area? Kind of funny how it all fits together, isn't it? Where's the one place on the planet where you've got dark-skinned people that don't get a whole lot of sunlight? Eskimos. Where do they get their vitamin D? From the fish. Folks, what I hope you're beginning to see is that God has got this thing tight and knit. If we would just open our eyes and open His Word, you know, like the gentleman said earlier, it's not science versus the Bible. God is the author of science. They go hand in glove. And our kids need to understand that. The problem is, our kids are getting a steady dose of this right here. You're an animal, you share a common heritage with earthworms. Quote, end quote. Moms and dads in this room, if you have a child or a grandchild that has hit the age of 5, they've already been indoctrinated. And the reason I can say that with such confidence, there's not too many 5-year-olds that are not absolutely enthralled with the dinosaurs. Kids love them. I mean, think about it for just a moment. We fill up our houses with all kinds of books, all kinds of figurines. I tell parents, if you haven't stepped on a plastic dinosaur figurine in the middle of the night, you're not qualified as a parent yet. Kids love them. But it's not just kids that love them. The reality is, we adults like them too. Magazines know that. They know that if they put their picture on the cover, they're almost guaranteed increased sales. And so they tell us where they were found. They tell us what they think they ate, all about their size. For instance, the largest one ever discovered, a creature called the Argentinosaurus. They estimate weighed 110 tons. You want to see a replica of this guy, you got to go to the Fernbank Museum down the road in Atlanta, where he is on display stretching from one end of the museum to the next. Now, let me show you how big this guy really is. Take a look at the right-hand side of the screen. That is a full-size T-Rex. It doesn't come up to this guy's hip bone. These things were massive. And yet, here's the problem. Our kids get hooked on dinosaurs by age 2, 3, 4 before parents even realize there's a culture war, there's an evolutionary debate and war going on. Before they ever step into school, they've already bought into the idea that dinosaurs lived millions of years ago. Let me show you how. Let's walk through the life of a child in your congregation. Maybe your grandchild. Start out about 2, 3 years of age, where we fill up our house with all kinds of dinosaur paraphernalia. The games, the books. In fact, some of you grandparents are guilty of buying the books without even realizing. They start out by saying dinosaurs walked this earth millions of years ago. They hit age 4. It's a cool morning in Georgia. February, you're over there, you're stirring their instant oatmeal. They're reading the package all the while they're learning about evolution. They hit age 5. Now they're eating everything. They want snacks all the time, so what do? You give them snack crackers, and they learn about evolution. They hit age 7. And finally, at age 7, they have behaved enough to go out to a fine dining establishment. So you load them up in the car and you go somewhere nice, like, say, Wendy's. You can tell I have 4 kids, can't you? Or maybe your child doesn't like Wendy's. Maybe they go somewhere like Arby's. where they're learning about evolution. They get a little bit older. They start taking field trips to museums. Maybe here locally, or maybe they go, I know there's a group right now, as I'm talking to you from this area, they've gone up to Washington, D.C., haven't they? Maybe they go to the Smithsonian. Or maybe you go down the road to the Fern Bank, or maybe you run up to Chicago to the Field Museum, where Sue is on display. Now, stop right there for just a moment. Everybody look at this picture. You see the kids in that picture? You think the parents of those children who signed the permission slip for them to go on that field trip, you think they actually thought about what their kids would be reading? Because I took this picture. And also took a picture of what they're reading on those placards. And folks, listen to me, there's no way to harmonize what they're reading with God's Word. They get a little bit older. They start reading chapter books. Now, I want to do this just for parents' sake. All the kids in this room who are familiar with the Magic School Bus, please raise your hands as high as you can. Very popular kids series, moms and dads. You open it up, lo and behold, there's a boy, he's got a dinosaur chasing a caveman. He says, this story is make-believe. His friend says, there were no dinosaurs in the time of cave people. In fact, top left-hand corner, no people ever saw a dinosaur. When early humans appeared on the earth, dinosaurs had already been dead for millions of years. People found out about dinosaurs from fossils. Or maybe your child likes the Magic Treehouse. Another very popular kids series. Folks, this one, you don't even get into the book yet before they've already told you human beings, of course, had not yet evolved. In fact, you open the very middle of this book, and it's got that timeline. The timeline that we're going to dismantle Monday. It's got that geologic column, the Triassic, the Jurassic, and then finally, human beings come into the picture here. They get a little bit older. They start taking science courses. Now they're in junior high, and they take a biology class and a botany class and a class called Evolution Changes Over Time. Pretty cool. Now here's a question I want to ask you guys. You think, as they introduce our kids into evolution, do you think maybe they might use dinosaurs to do that? In other words, do you think there are dinosaur pictures in this book? Let's look. Page 10. Page 16, page 25, page 28, 29, 36, 38, 39, page 46, 66, page 96, 97, 98, 99, 100. In fact, in a 100-page book, 1 in 3 pages has something about dinosaurs in it. And just to make sure that we all understand what the dilemma is in front of us tonight, let me very quickly show you. Right now, our kids are being taught that dinosaurs lived and died out roughly 65 million years ago. We came along carrying our clubs, allegedly, 3 million years ago. And yet, the Bible teaches a very different picture. The Bible says that all of creation was created in 6 literal days. We'll talk about literal days as well on Monday. But you notice it puts all land-dwelling creatures on day 6. When was man created, according to the Bible? Day 6. That would mean we had to coexist. Now I realize some of you right now are looking at that going, that is nuts. What, you mean man and dinosaurs coexisted? Listen to me very carefully. If you are in this room calling yourself a New Testament Christian and you believe the Bible is inspired, it has to be. Now I'm going to show you the evidence, but it has to be. You say, wait, time out, Brad. How could they have coexisted without the dinosaurs eating them? You got a Bible, you might flip open with me. Genesis chapter 1. Take a look with me at verses 29 and 30. The Bible says, God said, see, I have given you every herb that yields seed, which is on the face of the earth. Every tree whose fruit yields seed, to you shall be for food. Also to every beast of the earth, to every bird of the air, to everything that creeps on the earth in which there is life, I have given every green herb for food. And it was so. According to this book, both man and animals were what? Vegetarian. Now that explains a whole lot. That explains how man and dinosaurs could have coexisted without the dinosaurs eating man. It explains, for instance, how Noah could have gotten all the animals on that boat without them eating each other. They were all vegetarian. It also explains how Noah could have gotten the food necessary. They were all vegetarian. Is this a big deal in the field of science? Absolutely. Because folks, if you've got man and dinosaurs together, what you've done is you've wiped away millions of evolutionary years. It's not a question of did they exist, it's a question of when. Did they exist? We found their fossilized remains on all 7 continents, folks. 2 weeks ago, I was talking to a gentleman who had just come back from Antarctica. They found another dinosaur discovery in Antarctica. A couple months ago, I'm getting off a plane from Oregon. A friend of mine, preacher friend, he calls, he says, "Brown, we need you to come to our church. We got bones." I'm thinking, what are these people doing? Sure enough, they were digging an elevator shaft. In the bottom of that shaft, there were all kinds of bones. We spent hours digging them out, measuring them, taking pictures. I got loads of pictures in that computer right there. All kinds of dinosaur bones that were taken. I tell people, you don't think there are dinosaurs in the church? I got pictures of them right there. It's not a question of did they exist, it's a question of when. Somebody says, well, maybe God just put the bones down there for us to find later. Folks, God's not the author of chaos. Philip Kitcher wrote a book kind of telling us just how important this whole deal is. He claimed the solid evidence for the coexistence of dinosaurs and humans, look at what he says, would shape the foundations of the evolutionary theory. Because, of course, the dinosaurs are supposed to have been long extinct by the time hominids arrived on the scene. In other words, if you've got evidence of humans coexisting with dinosaurs, it's going to shake the foundation of that theory completely. And so what do the evolutionists do? They fill our kids' heads as often as they can. They didn't live together. Before I show you that evidence, let me give you about a 30-second history lesson. The word dinosaur itself came into existence in the year 1845. A gentleman by the name of Sir Richard Owen, he actually coined the term dinosaur. He used 2 Greek words, dinos, sauros, translated by him as fearfully great lizard. That was 1845. Did they live? Yeah. The question is not did they live, the question really is when did they live. Let's look at some evidence together. Now, before I show you the first slide, how many pieces of evidence would I have to show you to disprove this whole evolutionary millions of years ago? Realistically, if I had one good one, that would probably do it, right? I hope you brought a big bucket. This is a Mesopotamian cylinder, see, a rock stone that looks an awful lot like what you and I would call an apatosaurus. So maybe they just imagined those creatures. Or maybe somebody could explain to me these tablets that are attributed to Narmer, the legendary first pharaoh of the United Egypt. I guess maybe we should just ignore this archaeological discovery. Or maybe somebody can explain to me the discovery we made just a couple of short years ago when they found a dinosaur in the belly of a mammal. Now, why is that a big deal? Folks, don't forget the evolutionary timeline. Mammals were not supposed to come along until millions of years later, and yet you got a mammal that was eating one. Or maybe somebody could explain to me the Ica stones of Peru. A gentleman by the name of Dr. Javier Cabrera was given one of these stones as a birthday gift from one of the native farmers in Peru. He asked the man, he said, what is this? He noticed these elegant carvings on it. The farmer, he told him, this is a burial stone that the ancient Incan Indians used to place in their tombs. Well, Dr. Cabrera wanted to find as many of these burial stones as he could, so he began to explore the native Incan tombs. All told, he found about 11,000 of them. And over a third of them show very elegant pictures of dinosaurs. And not just dinosaurs, but actually in some cases, you got dinosaurs and men. In fact, if you look carefully, this guy's hunting it. And somebody says, surely those are like a hoax or a fake or... Oh, let me point out to you. There are people that will sell you fake ones. Absolutely. But the real ones that came out of tombs, folks, they got details right that we would not understand until years later. Let me give you one example. On the screen to my right, you see 3 Ica stones. And you'll notice outlined in yellow, they carved sauropod dinosaurs with these dermal frills, these bumpy frills on the back. For the longest time, researchers looked at that and said, that's not right. We've never found sauropod dinosaurs with these bumpy frills on their back. That was until 1992, when that's precisely what we did find. You see, the Incan Indians got it right the first time. It was 1992 before we realized, oops, they were right. Ellen Morris Bishop commenting on it, she said, the biggest finds found were about 9 inches long, shaped a little bit like a shark's dorsal fin. The smallest at the tail tip were about 3 inches high. Or maybe somebody could explain to me the 800-year-old Buddhist temple in Cambodia. Folks, listen to me, you can't fake this one. 3 years ago, they discovered this thing completely overgrown with vegetation. They came in with what you and I would call industrial strength Roundup. They kill everything, they pull back the vines. Lo and behold, they notice all of these elegant carvings. Like, for instance, this guy right here, that's a monkey. You see his face, his front legs, back legs, tail going up over his head. This guy you may have on your wall at home. This is a deer, his antlers, head, tail in the up position, back legs, front legs. But the artist didn't just stop with monkeys and deer. He carved all kinds of animals, like, for instance, dinosaurs. Now, I've had some friends of mine who've actually gone over for me. They've taken pictures, shot a little bit of video work over there. They were taking the tour. They came to this wall. They're snapping shots. They turned to their tour guide. They said, hey, how do you explain this? The tour guide smiled at them and said, I know what you're thinking, but we're supposed to tell you that's a porcupine. I've seen porcupines. That's not one of them. You know, if I were to ask a 10-year-old child, what is that right there? Not only would it identify it as a dinosaur, it would probably go and tell me, that's a stegosaurus. Or maybe somebody could explain to me these figurines from Acapulco, Mexico. Over 30,000 of these have been found with an ancient civilization. Question, how old are they? Well, they decided they would have them dated. They did. They sent them off to 2 labs. They came back with dates of roughly 2000 BC. Now, keep in mind, they always sent little pieces. When they called the labs, they said, hey, that material that we sent you, that came from dinosaur figurines. Both labs did the same thing. They withdrew their results and said, we're sorry, we weren't able to give you any accurate readings of your material. In 1990, though, we called. 1990, we sent some dinosaur bone off to the University of Arizona. Didn't tell them it was dinosaur bone. We simply said this is a blind study. We want you to date this material. They did. It came back with dates of roughly 9,000 years before present. Now, folks, that's a far cry from 65 billion, is it not? Or maybe somebody could explain to me this child's poncho that a buddy of mine, Dennis Swift, discovered in the tomb of a young child. Or maybe you could explain to me the petroglyph at National Bridges National Monument. If you go there today, there are 3 sandstone bridges, one of which is called Kachina. And it's on that particular sandstone bridge that the Anasazi Indians, they carved all kinds of things. You can actually go there today, you can see things like big horned sheep, and you can see things like dinosaurs. Folks, how would they know what to carve if they've never seen it? It's on these same bridges that they carved these flying reptiles, pterodactyls, pteranodon. According to evolutionists, those flying reptiles lived back before man in the age of the dinosaurs. And yet, I'm going to show you 2 slides. They're not the flashiest. 2 slides, they're quotes from historians who actually make the claim of seeing flying reptiles. The first is from a guy by the name of Harrub. 5th century BC, He said, "There's a place in Arabia to which I went on a hearing of some winged serpents. When I arrived there, I saw bones and spines of serpents in such quantities as it would be impossible to describe. The form of the serpent is like that of a water snake, but he has wings without feathers, and like as possible to the wings of a bat." All right, so let me get this straight. This guy knows the difference between birds, bats, flying reptiles. The second historian some of you have heard of, his name is Josephus. Josephus actually was living during the time of some of our apostles. He chronicled the death of Jesus Christ at the hands of Pilate, and he also wrote about flying reptiles. The folks get that for just a moment. What does that do to the evolutionary theory, keeping in mind Charles Darwin was not even a thought at that point? Or maybe somebody could explain to me this textile identified as a dinosaur by the Museum of Peru. Or maybe you could explain to me how Richard Bell, a man who died in 1496, 350 years before the word dinosaur came into existence, how he's got dinosaurs carved into his tomb. Or maybe you could explain to me this Mayan base. Or maybe you could explain these textiles from the Nazca tombs. Or maybe somebody in here could explain the discovery that Dr. Samuel Hubbard found in the Grand Canyon area, where he took an expedition down in there off one of the side canyons to the Havasupai Canyon. What did he find? He found their carvings. In fact, I want you to read with me what he had to say. He said, "Taken all in all, the proportions are good. The huge reptile is depicted in the attitude in which man would most likely see it, reared on its hind legs, balancing with a long tail, either feeding or in a fighting position, possibly defending itself against a party of men." He goes on to say, "The fact that some prehistoric man made a pictograph of a dinosaur on the walls of this canyon upsets completely all of our theories regarding the antiquity of man. The fact that the animal is upright and balanced on its tail would seem to indicate that the prehistoric artist must have seen it alive." Now, I brought a picture of what he saw. And that may not impress anybody in this room, but folks, let me tell you what. It's an awfully good representation of a creature called the Edmontosaurus. How did they know what to carve or draw? For those of you who are trivia buffs in the room, see that little white hole? That's a bullet hole. That would be from an evolutionist who decided that he didn't quite like the evidence and tried to get rid of it. Or maybe somebody can explain to me the soft tissue that was discovered recently in a T-Rex bone. I actually talked to the lady who made this discovery. Her name was Mary Schweitzer. She shared with me it was really by accident that they even found it. They had the femur of this T-Rex. They were trying to get it back to the lab. They realized they needed to cut the bone in two to get it on a helicopter. She said when we cut it right down the middle, we were able to look inside where we found soft tissue, blood vessels, and what she thinks are blood cells. And folks, you ask any molecular biologist worth their salt at all, they'll tell you soft tissue, blood vessels, blood cells, they don't stick around for 65 million years. I asked Dr. Schweitzer the one question that I thought was pertinent. I said, "Why do you think we've never seen soft tissue in a dinosaur bone before?" Her answer sent a chill right up my back. She said, "Maybe because we haven't thought to look." Since her discovery, we found soft tissue in 3 other dinosaur discoveries. In fact, folks, we're actually pulling proteins now out of T-Rex. Or maybe you could explain to me this pottery, these burial clothes. Or maybe you could explain to me this Roman mural. Keeping in mind that's hand-laid tiles. All I needed to show you was one. And I promise you, anybody in this room that's ever heard me speak, you know, I can go an hour by myself just on this right. I can stand up here easily for another 20 minutes clicking away. Somebody says, "Okay, Brad, why aren't they mentioned in the Bible?" No, that's not a fair question. The reason I say it's not a fair question is because you remember the year that I told you the word dinosaur was coined? 1845. When was your Bible translated into English? King James Version, 1611. How do you get a word in 1611 in a book in 1611 if that word didn't come along until 1845? A better question will be for you to ask me, is there compelling evidence of dinosaur-like creatures in God's Word? That's a fair question. And to that I would say, if you got a Bible with you tonight, open it up to the book of Job. You can actually open it up to the book of Isaiah. You can look at the book of Psalm. I just love Job. Job is a book where we find a guy who is in all kind of trials. We learn very early on that he loses his character is attacked. He loses his flocks. He loses his children. He's covered in boils. His wife in chapter 2, she says, why don't you just curse God and die? But he doesn't do that. Because not very long after she makes that foolish statement, we find Job's 3 friends coming on the scene. I put them in parentheses on purpose because they're not really what you and I would call friends. What they are is nosy. They're busybodies. They assume Job sinned and God is getting them back for it. So what you read in your Bible for the next 25 chapters is this running dialogue between Job and Eliphaz and Bildad and Zophar, his 3 friends. And they keep questioning him until Job gets mad and he requests to speak to God. In fact, if you look in Job chapter 13, verse 22, he phrases it this way. He said, do you speak and I'll listen, or you let me speak and I'll respond to you. Basically telling God, look, you can go first or I'll go first. It doesn't matter. Well, in Job chapter 38, we have God's response. The Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Now prepare yourself like a man. I will question you, and you will answer me. God's saying, you wanted to talk? Okay, here we go. Except I'm going to be the one doing all the talking. For the next 3 chapters, God deluges Job with question after question after question. If you have never read Job 38 through 40, let me encourage you to do so. Anybody in this room that ever needs a lesson on humility, that's a great section of the Bible. He says, Job, where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Job, where's the dwelling place of light? You see the eagle and the hawk, how do they fly? Hey, Job, what about snow and hail? How do I make those? Or Job, what about the behemoth? Job chapter 40, verse 15. Look now at the behemoth which I made along with you. He eats grass like an ox. See now his strength is in his stomach muscles. He moves his tail like a cedar. What's a behemoth? Somebody says, well, Dr. Harrub, I'm so glad that you're with us in Georgia because my Bible tells you exactly what it is. I got a footnote that says it's either an elephant or a hippopotamus. Well, let me very gently remind you, those footnotes are not inspired, are they? But I'll go on with you for a minute. Let's look at the description of this creature. It says, his strength is in his loins, the force of the navel of his belly. So obviously this is a creature that's got a large stomach, right? That guy have a big belly? Yep. That guy have a big belly? Yep. That guy have a big belly? Yep, keep reading. Job chapter 40, verse 17. He moveth his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his stones are wrapped together. Now, when it's talking about moving his tail like a cedar, this is going to be talking about some of the largest of trees. You say, Brad, how do you know that? Well, we're doing a little word study. You remember it was actually the cedars of Lebanon that were used to build the temple. These were mighty trees. The text here is saying, he moved his tail like a cedar. So let me ask you the question. That look like a cedar to you? Not exactly. How about that? Not exactly. That's getting a whole lot closer, isn't it? Somebody says, well, Brad, you got a small problem. And that is, we believe Job was a post-flood book. And by that I mean this. We think Job was one of the first books of the Bible written, but we believe that the events of Job happened after the flood. You're going to stand up there and tell us God created man and dinosaurs on days 6. Absolutely. And then we're going to read about the behemoth and another creature, by the way, in chapter 41 called the Leviathan in the book of Job. Wouldn't that mean? Yep. They had to be on that boat. Now, before you go packing me off to some nice rubber padded room, give me just a moment to explain. A lot of people in this room right now looking at that thinking, there's no way you're going to get dinosaurs on the ark. Let me ask you, did God make Noah take adult animals on the boat? Could he have taken juveniles? Well, let's see. What was their use? We know that their plan was to replenish the earth. So it would make sense then you would take animals that have a long reproductive life ahead, right? Now, I don't mean any disrespect to anybody in this room. I don't think there were any animals on that boat that had an AARP card. I don't think it happened. You ever seen when a dinosaur comes from? An egg, right? Largest dinosaur egg ever discovered would fit very cleanly in both of my hands. Now, I'll go ahead and tell you guys, I love the flood. I've studied it extensively the last few years. In fact, I've done a whole new series on it. I could easily go about 4 hours right now on nothing but that right there. The evidence is so phenomenal. For those of you who are sitting in this room right now looking at that thinking there's no way you can still get dinosaurs on it, all I want you to do is picture about 525 railroad boxcars, because that's what you can get on that boat. There's no problem getting all the animals. If God created all the animals, which he did, don't you think he can get the dimensions right for how big a boat he needs? I think he's probably a little bit better at math than we are. Somebody says, okay, what happened to him then? Folks, as I see it, that's really kind of the last question for the night before I open it up to your questions. Before I address that particular one, I'm going to share a little story with you. If you are in this room and you're from Arkansas, I'll go ahead and repent. Okay, don't beat me in the parking lot. I used to travel all around the world with two things. I had a dinosaur egg and an Ica stone, an actual stone. One of our Spanish translators had gotten it from the Acabaro family. And to me, there's nothing like being able to set that out, let people look at it, and you see firsthand the evidence. Then 9/11 happened. All of a sudden, security got to be a nightmare. Every single weekend, I'm getting my weekly pat-down massage. And sure enough, you know, I always carried them in my flight bag. I had both of them in my flight bag because you don't let stuff like that get too far away. And I'd get on the other side, they'd be looking out. So anyway, I'm coming out of Little Rock. I told you if you're from Arkansas or Penn. Coming out of Little Rock, I go through TSA. I get on the other side of the metal detectors. Sure enough, the TSA guy's holding both of them. He looks at me, looks at the stuff, says, "What's this?" I said, "Well, that's an Ica stone, that's a dinosaur egg." And I went on to explain a little bit. The whole time he's looking at that dinosaur egg, looking at me, looking at the egg, looking at me, looking at the egg. And he said, "He's still in there?" I thought, only in Arkansas. Folks, I wish that I could stand up in front of you tonight and tell you, here's what happened to the dinosaurs, but the reality is in science, we don't know for sure. And I don't have a problem looking at you and saying we don't know. There's a lot of things we don't know. Now, we do have theories. I am acquainted with about 27 theories of what allegedly killed the dinosaurs. I brought 5 of them with me. The number one that we all hear about the most, the one that's in the textbook, is that asteroid. But realistically, I think the asteroid, it causes more questions than it does solutions. Number 2, they say an exploding star may have flooded the Earth with intense radiation. Number 3, the Earth's climate became too warm, too cold, too dry, too wet for the dinosaurs' health. Number 4, changes in the dinosaurs' diet resulted in weakened eggshells that broke after being laid. Sad to say, number 5 really is a scientific theory. A laxative plant, the dinosaurs died, disappeared, and they all died of constipation. I'll let you decide if that one was probable, possible, or probable. Do I think I know what happened? Yeah, I do. Folks, I think that there was a creation that God deemed as very good. And I don't know that any of us in this room can really get how good it was. I know, scientifically speaking, the fossils bear that out. The Sahara Desert used to be a rainforest. There are palm trees and fruit trees buried below the ice in Antarctica. I know this used to be a mantle of spring-like loveliness. And then I think man sinned. And all of a sudden our relationship with God was shattered. If you read the Bible properly, one of the things you learn, he didn't just punish the man, the woman, and the serpent. He also began to curse the ground. Fast forward about 1,500 years, sin had grown until the thoughts of man were on evil continually. And I think God unleashed his fury on it. And I do think the dinosaurs won that vote. In fact, I think the evidence that I showed you tonight proves that they lived several thousand years post-flood. But I don't think they thrived again. Because I think that flood put into shape all of the weather patterns that we experience today. The Sahara Desert started heating up. The poles started freezing up. It was the flood that kicks off the ice age. So all of a sudden, those dinosaurs, they don't have a lot of room to roam. Being large, cold-blooded creatures, they needed lots of vegetation. Suddenly, those warm-blooded, fuzzy mammals started thriving. And folks, I think the dinosaurs did make it for a while. But I think ultimately two things got them. Number one, the change in the climate after the flood. Number two, what has man always done to animals we fear? We kill them. Genesis chapter 9, verse 3. After the flood, God is making a promise with Noah. He tells him, now you can eat meat. Now, folks, think about that for just a moment. Prior to that, we just read in Genesis 1, everybody's a vegetarian. It's after the flood. Genesis 9, verse 3, he said, okay, now you can eat meat. 20 years after the flood, Noah says, boys, go get something to eat. Shem, Jacob, they walk outside and they see a squirrel. They see a possum. And they see a stegosaurus. And they're thinking, man, that squirrel's small and greasy. Possum, we'll leave that for people in Arkansas. We could eat on that guy for a week. Moms and dads, here's the bottom line. We have the truth on our side. And our children, they do have questions. I told you from the beginning, kids are fascinated with these creatures, right? Every child, whether they are male or female, young or old, they have questions right now in their mind. It may not be the dinosaurs. It may be about where did I come from. It may be about angels or salvation. They got questions. They may never verbalize them to you. But here's the point. Eventually, they will get their answers to the questions. And mom and dad, if you don't spend the time giving them answers, it may be a guy in a white starched lab coat, a lot of initials after his name, who has absolutely no belief in a God, but at least he answered their question. I'm here to tell you it's time that we give them the truth. Because we've got it. I'm going to stop right there. I see some guys in the back that got microphones. We'll do it kind of like we did last night. If you've got a comment, a question, if you'll raise your hand, we will do our best to address that. Again, I can't see as well as I want to. Right down here.
Outstanding presentation. What would a die-hard evolutionist say about everything that he has seen tonight?
Okay, since I'm not a die-hard evolutionist, I don't know for sure, but I will tell you what some of them have told me personally. I've had several people that have shown up to seminars like this one, and they've told me, they said, you know, Brad, when you start the dinosaur stuff, you show the first picture too, I was prepared to rebut you and basically say that that was figurative, imaginary drawings, but after you hit like 20 or 30, I realized I didn't have a leg to stand on. And they admitted they'd never seen that evidence. So to me, it's kind of interesting Mainstream media has done a pretty good job of keeping this out. You say, why would they do that? Because folks, if you show a child this kind of information for an hour, you know what? All of a sudden they can start questioning evolution. And at the base of the whole evolution controversy is there a God? If so, we don't get to live any old way we want to. We can't be immoral. We got to bend the knee. So I have had several that showed up, and the bottom line is they look at it kind of, and if they are good soul, honest hearts who are not wearing blinders, there have been several people that we've converted out of atheism who've looked at the evidence honestly and said, you know what, you're right. Good question.
What is the carbon dating factor?
All right, great question. What about carbon dating? Let me slide forward just a little bit. Right. Let's do it the old-fashioned way. So, how does carbon dating work? Carbon dating, basically the easiest way to think of it is, right now, everybody in this room, you are taking in radiocarbon when you eat plants and animals. Radioactive carbon, carbon-14, don't worry, don't freak out, it's not going to kill you. Every one of us has got a little bit of radioactive carbon in our system. The way the dating method works is this. Anything that is radioactive breaks down over a slow period. So when you die, that radioactive carbon will actually start breaking down at what we think is a steady rate. You look on the screen, you'll notice the number is 5,730 years. They believe that is the half-life of radioactive carbon. So let me give you a really easy example. We find a bone. That bone has got 10 radioactive units in it. I've got 20. If this has got 10, I've got 20, that means it's lost half. That bone should be 5,730 years, right? A couple of problems with that. Number one, nobody's lived 5,730 years to know that's the half-life. Another problem, all of these assumptions have to be correct in order for that dating method to be correct, and I know 3 of them that have problems. Let me give you one example of that, okay? In order for radiocarbon dating to be correct, there has to be uniformity all across the planet from now all the way back to the Big Bang. And we know that's not the case. Here's why. If everybody in this auditorium is buried tonight, boom, you're dead, boom, we're fossilized. Same thing happens to a group up by Mount St. Helens and a group in Japan. All of us died the same night, we're all fossilized. They come back 2,000 years later, dig us up, date our bones. We should date exactly the same, right? Because we died the same night. And yet the people up by Mount St. Helens have been eating more radioactive material from where that volcano exploded. You think there's any radioactivity in Japan right now? So they're actually going to date younger than we are. Another problem. We find a dinosaur bone. That dinosaur bone has got 35 units in it. How old is it? Well, in order to know how old it is, you've got to compare it to a living dinosaur. How many living dinosaurs we got around us today? We don't know if the living one had 3,700, 350, 0.2. We don't have a clue. So I put a whole lot of stock in it. These are some peer-reviewed studies where they've shown that carbon dating is a joke. Now, they don't let that out very much. Living mollusk was carbon-14 dated as being 3,000 years old, keyword being it's still living. I love this one. Muscle tissue from beneath the scalp of an ox is dated at 24,000 years. Hair from the hind of the same animal dated at 7,200 years. I figured this one out, though. He had a toupee. Good question. Other comments, questions? We got a couple down here. We got, yeah, I'll let both of you. We'll converge. We got. Yes, ma'am.
I have a couple questions, but I don't think any one of them will take too long.
Okay?
The Natural Bridges Monument.
Yes.
Recently in the news, they did the whole, oh, it's not a dinosaur.
Acid rain.
Yes. And I was wondering, based on the fact that there's always lying with this, as we've seen,
Yeah.
were the pictures that put out doctored? You know, because they say, here's what the creationists use, and here's what the actual stone looks like.
Keep talking. I'm gonna pull it up so they can see what we're talking about. It's funny, I almost actually added that slide in. She is talking about, here we go. So, they come back and they said, this guy right here, all the other pictures really are carvings and pictures, but this one was caused by acid rain. Interestingly, years earlier, Fran Barnes, who, by the way, is an evolutionist, who is also a recognized authority on rock art in the American Southwest, he said there's a petroglyph in Natural Bridges National Monument bears a striking resemblance to a dinosaur. Why didn't he just call it a dinosaur? Because solid evidence of humans and dinosaurs coexisting would shake the foundations of the theory. Interestingly, he never said anything about acid rain. Why? Because he knew it wasn't. Why are they bringing it up now, 6 months ago? Because they're doing everything they can to get rid of all the evidence I'm showing you, one by one. Good question.
My next is, how long could a maximum roundabout number soft tissue last on a T-Rex?
Great question. What about soft tissue? My doctorate, I got a doctorate in anatomy and neurobiology. Dissected on a lot of people, probably 500-600 human bodies, cadavers in my tenure. You guys have probably seen shows like CSI, Law and Order, where they send a forensic pathologist out to try to figure out how long has something been dead, the decomposition. Okay, that's Hollywood. But there is a real place the University of Tennessee has. It's called the Body Farm, up near Knoxville, Tennessee. And folks, it is a place where human bodies are donated to science in order to see how long it takes to decompose in certain fashions. Like, for instance, if you want to know, you got a victim that died in 32-degree weather, partially clothed near a tree. They'll actually set that up and they can tell you. They got bodies by anthills, partially buried in water. You name it, they've done it. They have built one of the best decomposition databases, period. And I'm here to tell you, if we got soft tissue, blood vessels, blood cells, that critter has not been dead north of 500 years. I mean, again, if you're telling me it's 65 million, then what you're doing is you are now leaving the realm of science and you're moving into the faith and miracle realm that they accuse us of. Good question. Okay?
A project that a professor had done where he gave his students the bones of his dead dog and had them date the bones, split them up into groups, and they all came back with a range of time.
All kind of answers, yeah.
And I've never been able to find that again, and I was wondering if you have heard about that or know what I'm speaking about.
Come grab me afterwards. Let me give you one of my cards that's got my email on it. I think I've got a reference of what you're looking for. I know part of what, if it's the same one I'm thinking of, they dated some of the stuff in the grave of the dog. So now think about this for a second. If you go out and you bury Fido, somebody comes back and they're dating the stuff around the grave of Fido. They say, oh, these rocks and this dirt and this stuff is a million years old. And then they make the speculation that means the bones are so many millions old. Was Fido dead that long? How many times have we found a bone, we date something around the bone, we say, oh, that plankton is 5 million years old, therefore the bone must be 5 million years old. Folks, Fido died like 2 weeks ago, okay? And yet, it's the same thing. They're getting these crazy numbers. Send me afterwards, I'll give you my email. Yes, sir.
I want to know. all the other dinosaurs ate meat, why did the T-Rex have the big sharp ones? And
Why do you have the sharp teeth? Great question. So, we know there are animals today that do eat meat and they got sharp teeth. So if everything was vegetarian, how do we explain that? That is a great question. Let me tell you what I think, but I'll admit to you up front, I'm not 100% sure. There's been 4,000 years, roughly, since the flood, for animals to adapt to the environment that God put them in. So, is it possible that lions have adapted their teeth and dinosaurs adapted their teeth to that particular environment and that particular diet where they had lots of food? If you're a big vegetarian dinosaur and all of a sudden you're able to eat meat and there's more meat than there is vegetation, it's going to make sense that over time, kind of like the colors we were talking about, over time, animals that have the sharper teeth are going to live longer and pass that on to the next generation. Does that make sense? I'll share a study, a research study with you though, get you to think. About 6 years ago, the San Diego Zoo and the St. Louis Zoo did a study on animals we consider carnivorous that only eat meat, and they proved that those animals can subsist on green vegetation alone and not lose any of their BMI, not lose any of their body mass. So animals that we thought were only carnivores, we realize today, hey, you know what, they actually have the ability to eat vegetation alone. Good question. Thank you. Other comments, questions?
Are there any standards of ethics imposed on people who have been found to be falsifying the very evidence they're putting out to be true?
Okay. The dirty little elephant in the room is right here. Science is considered self-correcting. And by that I mean if somebody publishes something and it's not true, his peers are able to repeat that experiment and say, wait a second, we didn't get the same results. And so then they publish and say, here's what we got. Evolutionists will say, hey, it's good because we're self-correcting. The problem is they don't blow the whistle too often on folks who have either just outright lied or have bent their observations. There have been one or two small ones. In fact, in the last 5 years, you may have heard a guy got his hand slapped for claiming to have cloned humans, when the reality was he didn't clone anything. The reason he got his hand slapped was he used government money. But the reality of it is the number of times that scientists bend the truth, according to a survey, is extremely high. I'll share a dirty little secret with you that you guys won't like to hear. My area of study was primarily Alzheimer's and Parkinson's research. And we would get drugs in by manufacturers basically saying, hey, we want you to test our drug to see if it works on Parkinson's or Alzheimer's. We always would do the same thing. We would go through animal regimens first and then humans. One particular drug, we were getting no result. Nothing. I mean, we went through mice, rats, chimpanzees, all of these rabbits. We went through all these animals. Nothing. And my head researcher, he looks at me and said, Brad, you got to give me something because they're giving us a lot of money. Try it on gerbils. I'm looking at him going, what do you mean? He said, we got to prove something. Sure enough, the gerbil, a little bit different brain, showed a response. So what is he reporting? Hey, this drug does good stuff. We're ready to go to human trials. So, you know, the dirty little secret in the room is they'll eventually get you the result you want, even though they've had to kind of manipulate the experiment to do so. It's not a great ethical situation. I'm not in this room saying all scientists are bad or unethical. That's not what I'm saying at all. There are some great guys out there doing good work. But I do know that there are observations that are bent in order to fulfill a grant, in order to get money and get tenure. Other comments, thoughts, questions? Yes, sir.
Can you summarize radioisotopes in the age of the Earth dive? Just in a nutshell, how the study was done, because to my knowledge, this is one of the slam dunks to prove that the Earth is creation is young and not old.
Okay, you talking about, for instance, potassium argon type dating? Okay, same principle as what we were just talking about with radiocarbon. All forms of radiometric dating have assumptions built into them, and that is that stuff is decaying at a steady rate. So if we find, for instance, if we're doing potassium argon dating, and you find a certain amount in something, and you got a living standard and you're doing the differences, you say, okay, that has decayed this much. The problem with potassium argon and other elements is their half-life is in the hundreds of thousands of years. So it's even harder for creationists to say, wait a second, that's not true, because none of us are going to live long enough to ever disprove that. What you need to ask somebody is, does this form of dating take into account things like hurricanes, wildfires, volcanoes, the wildfires of California, any kind of disruption in nature? And the answer is no. All of those things can introduce more radioisotopes into something, artificially change it, so that when you're taking measurements, even though you think, hey, this is normalized, it's not. Good question. Other thoughts, comments? Yes, ma'am.
I have a 3-year-old who loves dinosaurs, and I would like to hear your thoughts on why they are going after such youngsters. We have to be careful with what comes on the television, and it's not discreet anymore. The dinosaur train theme song is just pure evolution.
Absolutely.
I just would like to hear your thoughts on why are they starting so young, and who is behind it? Who's getting these programs on TV?
Well, if you actually really do your homework and look at how did we get to where we are today, there's been a pretty good agenda, and it is an agenda. Let me back up from that. I think there are two groups out there. I think that a lot of professors in school are like my professors, who are simply regurgitating the same thing they were taught. I don't think they're evil men at all. But I also know that there is a group of people out there who don't like the light. I mean, that's the easiest way to say it. They would like to basically disrupt our entire society. I mentioned communism last night, socialism. Part of what they want is the collapse of the family. Why do they want that? So that the state can then raise your children. Are they getting successful? Absolutely. So if I were going to try to mess up your family, how would I do that? Probably husband and wife are too close together. So I go after your kid. Why? Because if I get your kid, then I got his kids and your grandkids and your great-grandkids, and I got the whole future generation. So how do I get your kid? I get him before you even know that there's a war. I get him when he's 2 and 3 watching cartoons, and I'm putting evolution into the cartoons. I'm putting it into his books. So by the time he hits kindergarten, he already mentally, even though he doesn't know it, he already thinks dinosaurs way long time ago, man over here. Totally against what the Bible is teaching. So he actually grows up kind of almost in a schizophrenic mindset because you're teaching him the Bible, right? Hopefully. He goes to church. He learns Bible accounts. Abraham, Sarah, Noah, the flood, Christ's crucifixion. He's learning that right here, but he's also learning secular history. The two don't ever meet. He hits 18. By the time he hits 18, when he's ready to lay his own belief system, he believes that this is all proof, fact, and evidence, and this is a myth. And he gets rid of this. So what you've got to do at age 2, 3, and 4 as he's growing up, first off, is get rid of the garbage, filter that out of your house. Second, you've got to start teaching him a history that involves Adam and goes all the way to us today. A biblical worldview. Do I think that they're really purposefully targeting kids? Yeah. Adolf Hitler, let me control the textbooks and I'll control the state. Moms and dads, one of the things that you are going to find out probably too late, your kids are going to be very tolerant to the sin of homosexuality. Why? Because they've gotten to our kids before we did. In the church, this is going to be a huge issue in about 7 years when this whole generation comes through that has already been through school, has been taught tolerance, now they're going to be our fathers, our mothers, our deacons, and eventually our elders. And they basically think anybody speaking out against it, that's hateful, that's hate speech. Because they got to it before we did. Good comment, good question. One or two more, then I'm going to let you guys go.
Dr. Harrub, could you expand on this? You touched on this just a moment ago, but to expand on her question, to reiterate the motivation of these people. You mentioned that a while ago about they'd have to bend the knee. Expand on that, please.
They have to say that again?
They'd have to bend the knee. They couldn't live an immoral life.
Oh, yeah. I mean, let's be honest. At the core of this whole thing, I mentioned last night 2 worldviews. One is there's a God, one is there's no God. Why would anybody openly want to say there's no God? Because it allows you to live however you want to. The 2 places where they are actively recruiting is very young and college. Why would they recruit at college? How many college students do you know of that want somebody coming in saying, hey, you need to live a moral life. You need to do X, Y, Z. College kids most of the time don't want to hear that. And so they're very receptive to this idea of no God, Big Bang, immorality. What they are doing is they are trying to get our kids who are in the light to come join them in the darkness so that they don't feel any guilt, so their conscience is not bothered when they decide they want to have 3 wives, or they want to have same-sex partners, or they want to gamble, or they want to drink, or they want to live any way they want to, they want to marry a 12-year-old, whatever the sin is, they don't want somebody imposing morality on them. How do you do that? You get rid of God. And that's what they're effectively doing. That's why, folks, listen to me, that's why it's not really a culture war against religion. It's really not against religion. They'll let other religions. It's against the Christian religion. Judeo-Christianity. When you bring up, hey, God has said this is right and this is wrong, they don't like that. They don't want to hear that.
To address the dating issue, let's not forget that God created a mature earth.
Absolutely, he did.
The chicken did indeed come before the egg.
Absolutely. He said that God created a mature earth. The way we know that for sure, he turns to Adam and he says, hey, you can have fruit of any of these trees in the garden except this one. What's that mean? The trees were already producing. They're already producing fruit. Now, here's what I want you to think about. Let's say that you and I had the opportunity. God came back and said, hey, I want to transport you back in time. I want you to witness the first marriage ceremony. Now, we're excited. We get to see Adam and Eve being joined together. We realize we can't show up empty-handed. We got to buy a wedding gift. Now, I'm a guy, so we don't buy china and towels, okay? We go to Home Depot or Lowe's, we buy a big old chainsaw. Okay? Wrap it up, we take it, we give it to Adam, he fires that thing up, he goes out in the garden, he cuts down a tree. How many rings would that tree have? Because it's just 3 days old. So, like he's saying, God created a mature creation. Do I think that stuff is millions of years? No, absolutely not. But do I know that he created a mature creation? Absolutely.